I think we're going to start by showing a video of the event itself, and then kind of backtrack and go over how we got to this amazing moment.
Okay.
Vehicle reports that interface. At this time, begin pressurizing the propulsion system to increase the thrust of the system. Use that for maneuvering that we're about to do. The vehicle just reported via tone that it has started guided entry. Target at this time. We have seen peak deceleration. We should have parachute deploy around Mach 1.7. Parachute is deployed. We are decelerating. Feed shield has separated. We're on the ground. We're down to 90 meters per second at an altitude of 6.5 kilometers and descending. Standing by for backshell separation. We are in powered flight. We're at an altitude of 1 kilometer descending. Standing by for sky crane. Sky crane has started.
Eagle to Odyssey, remain strong.
Touchdown confirmed. We're safe on Mars. Time to see where our curiosity will take us.
I mean, one thing that strikes me watching that, and there's an amazing video you can see online if you feel like going back, called 7 Minutes of Terror, that NASA put together, is, you know, it's pretty good production quality, and they really put some effort. NASA's gotten pretty good at marketing itself, at making us kind of reconnect with the wonder of the space program.
I would say that there are people at NASA that have gotten good at it. I wouldn't say necessarily I mean, people look at that 7 Minutes of Terror, and it's a friend of mine who is a videographer, and he put that together kind of on his own. And the footage that has me in it was done where I went at a lunch hour to help him put together a rough cut so he could pitch doing that, because he was really struggling getting that message out. What NASA did do is they let it get out, and then the rest took care of itself.
Right. They had an event right on the night of the landing where they brought in all these kind of space nut celebrities, Alex Trebek,
Yeah.
Nichelle Nichols, Will Wheaton, who played Geordi Crusher on Star Trek. Seth Green is a space nut. And the producer for The Big Bang Theory came out, and they all kind of spoke to the Twitter folks and connected. Is that a big effort now too to kind of?
Yeah, I think I think we see it. You're all here tonight, mostly, I think, because of social media. I say that because back in 2004, we put a pair of rovers, and I worked on that mission 2, Spirit and Opportunity. We put them on the surface, and they had a pretty crazy, wacky looking landing system, and we were top on the news for about 48 hours. And then Britney Spears got out of a limo not wearing something, and we were off the CNN top story. And literally, it was Britney Spears. And because in 2004, there were not the kinds of volume across the kinds of different options for getting content out and distributed, that once you were, you know, the nightly news had 5 things to talk about, and if you were the 6th thing, you didn't happen that day. And now, with social media, if it's interesting to you, and you send it to you, and they told 2 friends, and so on. And so the response is awesome.
Right.
And I think I think NASA's figured that out. I mean, it's pretty clear. So
I saw Colbert, I think, the night of the landing had a Twitter that said, "Next stop, Planet Hollywood," which kind of captured it from him.
Right. Right.
Well, let's backtrack and talk a little bit. I know you have some slides that kind of set the scene of what the challenge was in the first place for getting to Mars. It would be nice to.
Sure. just to bring you all along, right? We were asked to go to Mars because forever we've been wondering if there's life on Mars, because it's our neighbor planet, because we're wondering if we're alone in the universe, and because when we first looked at Mars with a telescope, we saw canals and roadways, things that made us certain that it was alive. We were asked to go to a specific place on Mars, and this is an image of it. It's the Gale Crater. This is satellite imagery that's been constructed into a 3D rendering that's altitude correct. And you can see the rim of the crater in the outside portion of the image, and then in the center, this huge mountain, Mount Sharp.
And that's about 90 miles in diameter, right?
About the size of the big island of Hawaii. And that mountain is taller than anything in the continental U.S., 15,000 feet tall. So they wanted us to put a rover down sort of between the proverbial rock and a hard place between the mountain and the crater's edge. And to do that, we were going to have to do much better than we had done before. So this is now looking down from space, that same crater, colored relief. Orange is high, blue is low. You could see the orange spot in the middle, which is the mountain, and the rim of orange around the edge. And what I've overlain on that is the landing footprint, the uncertainty, our miss area for all of the historic previous missions to the surface of Mars that were successful. And then down there in the center, in solid, is what we had to do with Curiosity to make her able to land there. So we had to do better than we'd done before. And when we got down to the surface, more accurately than we'd been before, we were going to have to do the same kinds of things. Hit the atmosphere going really, really fast, fast enough to burn yourself up. You slow down enough, but still not enough. 1,000 miles an hour, you open up a parachute. Slows you down a little bit more, still not enough. You go to rockets at about 100 miles an hour. And then you end up with that last gentle kiss to the surface, which oddly, in terms of your speed, is nothing, but in terms of effort is almost everything. There's an old vaudeville joke that goes, it's not the fall that kills you, it's the landing. And it's sort of true. So,
and the atmosphere is a problem, right? Because
if there's not enough atmosphere, just the wrong amount of atmosphere, sort of a big pain in the tush to land there. Because if there's less atmosphere, you just ride rockets the whole way like you would at the moon. If there's more atmosphere like Earth, you'd get a lot of better slowing down. So it's a challenge. But when we get down to the bottom, we had to land something that was bigger than we'd ever landed also. So this is Curiosity sitting beside Sojourner and a model of either Spirit or Opportunity. They're twins, so you could choose which one you want to be thinking of looking at. So in 97, we put a little tiny sized rover. In 2004, it was more the size of maybe one of those, a four-top table, a little bit tall, a little bit bigger. Curiosity is much, much bigger and much heavier. And because of that, it was a real challenge to land her. Here she is, in sort of in human terms, beside a Mini Cooper.
And is she designed, was there an anthropomorphic goal in designing her? I mean, I imagine NASA saying, well, we need cameras anyway. Why don't we put it in something that looks like a face that'll help us make this appealing to people?
Yeah, so that's a very fair question. Not really. So the eyes are separated about the human eye separation so that when we take images of the surface and we put them into stereo, humans can relate to the distance is just like as if they were there. So that's a natural anthropomorphization. But different people see a different face in that head. Like some people see a monocle, that pink, as like the eye, like a one-eyed beast. By the way, that pink is it's a high-energy laser that can zap rocks from about halfway across this cabaret and vaporize the surface of the rock and look through the pink telescope eye at the vapor and determine the composition of the rocky material and decide whether we want to drive over there and do other sampling. But Some people see that as an eye. The real two eyes are actually below that as dark patches. Not intentional, but it certainly is evocative of, I think we're very capable of seeing our
Places in
reflection
anything.
in everything.
Right. So you've got to
Echo,
land this
right?
giant rover.
Yes.
And, one question I have is, 7,000 people are involved in the making of this whole mission.
Yeah.
What subset of that designs this rover, and how do you possibly organize that many people into a coherent whole that creates this targeted mission?
Right. It's a challenge. It really is a challenge. And actually for us, I think the size of her physically and the size of her in complexity really challenged us. You will recall that we slipped. We were due to launch in 2009, and we launched in 2011. When you're going to Mars, you only get opportunities every 26 months. And if you miss it, you have to wait 26 months for the next opportunity.
And why is that?
Just the way going around the sun, you could conceivably go to Mars any old time you wanted to. It's just energetically very, very favorable. So it takes rockets the size of which we have every 26 months. You get a great opportunity that has very low energy, and we have rockets big enough to get us to Mars. If you want to go any old time, you need to invent a bigger rocket. But, so her complexity, her size, her magnitude bewildered us, challenged us. And she got that way in a sneaky way, without us really realizing what we were getting ourselves into. Like, the water just got warmer, and all of a sudden we were boiling.
You mean it started out as a smaller rover, and the scientists kept adding parts to it?
No, we knew it would be that big because of the science that we were taking along, all the instrumentation that we had eyes for. We did not appreciate how complex it would emerge as being, and therefore how challenging it would be. To answer your question, I'm rambling. To answer your question, the way you design something this big is just like your mother taught you how to eat your steak. You cut it into small pieces that you can chew. So you break up the task into elements that are attackable by groups of people whom you could understand. Like, for instance, this would be a very large team, because it'd be very hard to, although I'm talking to all of you right now, but it'd be very hard to have a conversation with all of us. But maybe half of these much people, you might be able to work a certain task. So you look for ways of breaking the development into pieces that you can get your hands around.
Right. And a lot of the technology was already what you call heritage technology, right? Stuff that you had borrowed parts that you'd even going back to the Apollo days.
Yeah. People love to think that, I would love it if it was the case, but there's a sense that we are developing like cutting edge technology, and we really use super old, slightly dumb technology. We may assemble it in novel ways, but we don't have the time to develop cutting-edge bits and pieces, so we use old bits and pieces. My cell phone outstrips the computational power of that rover by a factor of 10. It's using a RAD, a PowerPC 750 chip. I don't know if you guys remember the G4 Macintosh. It's using the chip in a G4 Macintosh.
So let's look. I know you have a slide that shows some of the different iterations of the landing system that you thought of.
All right. So we tried. So the big rover, that's the challenge. So you start with big science, trying to learn more about the surface, gives you big instruments. Big instruments begets big rover. Big rover begets big landing problem. And so we started with the things that we knew about. So those are the airbags. Now, the previous two landers that we put down, the previous two rovers, the little tiny Sojourner and the coffee table-sized Spirit and Opportunity, they did that final kiss, that final embrace with the surface using airbags. We tried to make that work for Curiosity, but she's too big, and she stresses out the airbags too much. There's actually not any fabric known to humans that is strong enough for us to make a bag out of that could survive. We tried to use legged landers. So Viking, which had gone to the surface in the late 70s, landed on a tripod, milk stool kind of lander. And we said, we'll just put a rover on top of it. We lost a mission to the surface of Mars in 1999. It was called the Mars Polar Lander. And it was also a tripod lander. And so when we went back in the 2000s and were doing the failure analysis, which is actually usually where we learn our best and most focused lessons is after failures, we rediscovered how very sensitive legged landers are to terrain. Very tippy. They don't like slopes. So you put a big mega rover on top of it, and it's really tippy, intolerably tippy, so that was out. So we tried to solve the tippy problem by taking the three-legged lander and turn it into a sort of a squat water skeeter kind of thing, maybe 6 legs, really broad.
I imagine like you guys sitting around just making sketches and saying,
Yeah.
what about this? I got this flat version.
That is exactly what happens.
Is that literally,
Yes, in rooms, different times, groups of us throwing ideas around. That comes up with some fertile architectures that then you need to do some engineering work to see how well they'll behave, right? So they're they're germs in someone's imagination, and then you need to do the labor of materializing it into a design that you see if it will actually hang together. That one doesn't. And it doesn't because it shoves the propulsion system, which has explosive fuel, right down against the rocks. You don't want to let yourself blow up on landing. That's super, super not okay. But we looked at armoring. Well, we were clear on that, but we looked at armoring that bottom to keep the rocks off, and that just became really too tough, too massive. It was just destroying itself. So in the fall of 2003, the pallet was struggling. That was the thing we were using at the time. We got a whole bunch of people together, people who weren't on the project. At that time, I was not on the project. And we assembled all sort of the intelligentsia, and we got into a room, and we did a 2-day brainstorming session, and we brought all the ideas that had been previously on the table back out and looked to see if there was something that we'd missed or some perversion of a previous idea that might work out. And out of that came that, which is we called direct placement, but now everybody knows it as the sky crane.
So now you have this. Maybe you should quickly describe how the sky crane works, what it does.
Good. So the big rover on the surface of Mars in a way that's insensitive to slopes. Some of you may not be familiar with the way we landed the airbag landers. We would come in, we'd pop a parachute, then we would lower the rovers inside a tetrahedron, a pyramid-shaped solid, below the back shell, which had rockets in it. Then we would inflate these airbags, light the rockets, slow down to as slow as we could get it. It was imprecise. The kinds of rockets we were using, the kinds of sensors we were using were imprecise. Slow us down, and then some number of feet, 10, 20, 30 feet above the surface, we would have come to about a stop, and we'd cut the airbag part free. The airbags would bounce on the surface, come to a stop, deflate, open up, and get the rovers out. And it worked 3 times. Can't do the airbags, but what happens if you imagine that whole system, but without the airbags on it, and you just deliver the rover? Well, it ends up being that doesn't work for a reason that will be too long to talk about. But the way we chose to do it is kind of akin to that, where the 2 vehicles, the descent stage, which acts as the crane, and the rover are attached to each other. They jump off the parachute onto rockets, you saw it in the video, fly as a single body, and then in vertical flight just above the surface, the rover is lowered below the descent stage, and the 2 of them together continue at 3/4 of a meter a second, which people ask me, what is that? And the thing I tell them, which is about right, it's a brisk Manhattan walk. It's about 1.7 miles an hour, which if you watch somebody walking around here, that's about what they get. Deposits the rover on the surface. It's only cables attaching the two. So as soon as the rover's on the surface, the descent stage, which has been dutifully told to go at that brisk Manhattan walk, 1.7 miles an hour, straight down, notices that it's the throttles on the rockets have been turned way down, because to continue going downwards, it had to turn them down because half of its weight was gone. Okay, I've checked, I double-checked, I triple-checked, I got a lot of time here, it's gone, I cut myself free and fly off. By landing the rover wheels down, the rover is designed to drive around on slopey terrain. So now, if the rover can drive on it, we can land the rover on it. And so that took care of the slopes, it allowed us to get the rover directly onto the surface, and it just required the immense complexity that developed out of it.
Right, so now you've got, I mean, that's the drawback, right? You've got all
Yes.
these moving parts that
Right.
all have to work.
Yeah. So it used to be that we'd show up at Mars and we have to roll the dice and hope that Mars wasn't going to kill us. We couldn't tell. We were sensitive to rocks, the size of which we could never see from orbit. We were sensitive to winds and the atmospheric conditions in a way that we would never know. And we just had to hope for good luck. So what we did with this is we killed all of those dragons, those demons. We slayed them. So now we could show up in any atmospheric conditions. We knew absolutely that if we couldn't see it from orbit, it didn't matter to this vehicle. So we had a ton of certitude about Mars, but the deal we made with the devil was we took all of that inside ourselves in terms of complexity, and that's what we paid for. So now if it failed, it was likely going to be our fault and not bad luck at Mars.
And you've got this added kind of horrible complexity, which is you can't test it.
Right.
Right? I mean, you can't test the whole...
Yep.
And
Yep.
why is that? Explain.
Well, so different gravity, different atmosphere. You cannot do a test here on Earth that would work and tell you enough about Mars and the performance of the EDL system, entry, descent, and landing system at Mars. So you don't. You test little pieces of it, a piece here, a piece there, and you string it all together in a computer simulation, and you hope that you did that right.
Why don't we... I think we have a couple
Yeah, I
of
think we
slides
do.
of that.
Let's see.
Fine.
Here's a computer simulation, an early one, encouraging us that this might be a good idea. This is landing on a slope, a 35-degree slope, which if you were all sitting on a 35-degree slope, you'd feel it was a cliff. Believe it or not. This is steeper than the rover can actually rove on, as mentioned by its skittering downhill, but it can still be landed on it. So we really were able to convince ourselves that if the rover could land on it, or could drive on it, we definitely could land her on it.
And that really, I mean, that little simulation is enough to...
No, there were
give
like,
you
this
some
is,
I'm getting a little worried.
yeah, this is like one of, I don't know, let's say 30,000 such simulations
Okay.
that we did that encouraged us that it might be a good idea.
Done, we've got it.
Yeah, looks good.
It's not rolling down the hill.
This is actually what it would really look like. This is our best model of the rover. This is a cell phone video of mine. A little noisy, but otherwise pretty boring. I mean, not totally boring. So we did a lot of testing. That's another example of a piece of testing. This is like going to be my vacation with the rover. We went out into the late, actually, quite late, in May of 2012. The vehicle was flying to Mars. It was on its way to Mars. And we recognized that this long, dark image in the landing ellipse was a set of black sand dunes. And that we were then the question came, how close do we want to land to those sand dunes? The sand dunes are close to the final science target, so we want to get close and maybe land on them. If they're dangerous, we will land far away from them, but then we'll have to drive a longer distance. So we went out in May to the Dumont dunes, and these are them. It was 108 degrees in the shade. And we dropped the rover and then dug it into the ground to try and reproduce what might happen.
This is in Death Valley.
This is in Death Valley. It was hot enough that my boots there, I should have had better, like, insulated boots, but my boots were just leather boots. I got blisters on the top of my feet from it. Anyway, but she did great. We buried her with shovels, got heat stroke, and the rover just drove right out of it. So we convinced ourselves that she was good to go in terms of landing on those black sand dunes, and we allowed ourselves to have those in our uncertainty footprint. Here's another holiday spot. This is the cathedral of industry. No, this is a small glimpse at a corner of the world's largest wind tunnel. It's at NASA Ames. It's powered by 6 huge 10 kilowatt each electric motors with fans, and you're looking at one of those motors. So there's 6 of them in a row. I don't have a picture of all 6, but they're side by side, 2 sets of 3. The test section looks like this. You could see maybe little people in there, and wind comes in through that sort of vertical slot, blind-looking thing, gets sucked in and blown through. And we test, this is the world's largest wind tunnel, and we test the world's largest supersonic parachute in it. This is a video of that. And, you know, not all of the testing is boring, and not all of the testing actually goes well. And here's a good example. This is the world's largest parachute, supersonic parachute, destroying itself in the wind tunnel at Ames. And, you know, these things happen. They're very, very anxiety-provoking. And there are moments when you don't know if you have a solution. You know, until you figured out why that went wrong, you don't know if you're going to make it.
So what did you do to fix that parachute? What changed?
So this problem ends up being an Earth test problem. So we're testing in much more dense atmosphere, 100 times more dense atmosphere. It's like honey, relatively. And so we are opening the parachute in a very slow-moving airstream. It's only moving at about 80 miles an hour, when at Mars it'd move about 1,000 miles an hour. So the parachute takes so long to open that it has an opportunity, as it's sitting there flapping against each other, to get inverted and pull itself inside out. And that's what it did. And so for these tests, we put these things called anti-inversion netting. Imagine fishnet on the front, so that it prevents it from pulling itself inside out.
And you have a video
yes.
of it working.
And
right?
so in the end, this is an image, same wind tunnel, same parachute design, except this is what it's supposed to look like at Mars, about 10 times faster. And so that's, you know, then you breathe a sigh of relief and you go on to your next thing.
That's right. So how many pounds of force can that resist? Or
that one, we topped that out at 65,000 pounds of force. So that, you know, certainly more than all of you would weigh, maybe 2 or 3 of these rooms.
So tell me a little bit about presenting this, what one NASA researcher told me, he called it a cockamamie device. So trying to sell this to your higher-ups at NASA, what was that like?
That was also anxiety-provoking. Early on, we had designed this system, and we'd done the analysis, those computer simulations. We hadn't built it yet. And the NASA administrator, whose name was Mike Griffin at the time, his name's still Mike Griffin. He was the NASA administrator at the time. He thought that it looked a little crazy. It's a very natural response. And he asked us to come and do some splaining. And so we put together a set of slides, and we went out to this meeting. And it was, it's in a very fancy room, a little bit like this, smaller, but in an amphitheater setting. and it had video tie-in to all of the 8 NASA field centers. So all of the directors of each of the 8 NASA field centers were dialed in, and everybody was there, and Mike comes in a little late in a double-breasted blazer and a mock turtleneck, total Bond villain look. And he announces to the room that when he heard what we were doing, he thought it was crazy, and so he's hauled us in to tell him what the heck we're thinking. And so we told him what we were thinking. And it was, not, it wasn't totally smooth. We had some disagreements through the course of the hour and a half or 2 hours or so that it went on. But eventually, he ended by standing back up, thank God, and addressing the same people and saying, I thought it was crazy when they came in here, and after seeing it, I think it still is crazy, but it might be just crazy enough. It might be the right kind of crazy. So with that, all of a sudden, these other NASA field centers who had not been very responsive, I would phone somebody up and say, hey, can you do this test for me? And they'd say, yeah, we're right on that. We're getting right on that. And I'd get nothing from that because they looked at what we were doing as being something that was just going to be killed any moment. And after that meeting, I'd phone them up, hey, can you do this test? Yes, we're on it. And they really were on it. So it made a big difference. Yeah.
But it also put an enormous amount of pressure on you, right? It was the notion that your team had come up with this crazy idea, and if it didn't work, everybody knew where to point the finger.
Right. Yeah, that was a problem with it in that, if you're doing something that looks a lot like the things that have been done before, and it doesn't work out, you got unlucky, something happened, who would have expected? But if you're doing something that looks totally whack, and everybody on the street says, that's not going to work, and then it doesn't work, they're like, well, duh, I told you it wasn't going to work. So we really, really felt, the term we used in the team was, we felt very exposed. If it went well, we'd be lauded as brainiac, brilliant guys. And if it went poorly, we would be, obvious idiots.
But were there factions within your team, a conservative faction that said, no, this is too much, let's scale back and give them something more conventional?
No, we really couldn't. It wasn't like we picked this out of a beauty contest. We liked this one the best. We couldn't make the other ones work. We were kind of backed into this position by the laws of physics. And then we sort of found ourselves concluding this result that looks so crazy, but we accepted it. And there was no heterogeneity in the team with respect to that question. There's a lot of heterogeneity in the team and a lot of disagreements. But in terms of that this was the only way to go, no, we were all on board.
Okay. Well, let's backtrack a little bit. I wish we had some great slide material for this phase of the conversation, but I'd love to talk about your background as a rock musician and your early career.
All right.
So I guess the first thing, you told me that you flunked out of a couple of math courses, you got a B in trig. It's hard for me to imagine you being where you are today and not having the chops in high school to pass a math class. What happened? Did you suddenly get a flash, or what changed?
Yeah, well, by the way, that's a great question that I can't really fully answer, but it's one that you all should ask yourselves, because I had very successfully convinced everybody in the world, including myself, that I was really bad at math. I was certain of it. They were certain of it. I mean, it was pretty easy. It was pretty clear. And we were all wrong.
Did you just not do your homework? Did you just not come to class?
No, I did not go to class. I did not do homework. I would, if I had friends in the class, they would tell me when tests were. I'd ask them what the material was on. I'd open up the book. I'd look through the material. I'd try and figure it out and shove it in my brain and go and take the test, and I'd get a D or sometimes maybe a B. Those were or many times an F. I passed geometry the second time with an F+.
That's a pass?
Well, it was.
California school.
I guess it was. Northern California hippie schools. This was public school.
F+, hey, yeah.
It was, Mrs. Hunter was her name. And I'd had her when she gave me the regular F the first time. And I think she really didn't want to see me again. So it was like, okay, fine, just get out of here.
So then, had you been playing music this whole time? How did you get
So I was big in the theater department in high school. Great theater. We had a very active theater department, toured the state, and I was involved in that. And started playing music like junior year, but not like playing in the band where all the studied guys were. I was, the not reading music, just by ear, garage banding it. Before that was a registered trademark of the Apple Corporation, and out of high school, so I really did poorly in high school. We are getting that image to the point where my sophomore and my junior years, I got 1 A and 5 Fs each semester because I'd go to the theater thing and I wouldn't go to any other classes. And the state of California has a rule, you have to, without 32 absences, they can't give you credit. So would do this because I was doing some weird head trip. I would go and take these tests, and sometimes I'd have a passing grade in the class, but the teachers couldn't give me the grade, and I was sort of, oh yeah, are you really going to follow the rules there, or are you going to let me go? So, at any rate, so I didn't go back to pick up my diploma from high school. They held your diplomas for my graduating ceremony because this was back in the days of streaking. And they thought, and it worked, that the threat of not giving you your diploma, which was legally your right, would keep you from streaking in the thing. And it worked! Is that the craziest thing in the world? Oh my God, they may not give it to me.
Because you really wanted to streak, that was your goal?
Yeah, that was. I got many other opportunities though, so that was worked out. In fact, I just got a badge on Yelp that involved streaking just last night. But really, Yelp does have a streaking related badge, but not to do with streaking. But anyway. So I didn't know that I graduated high school. I just started playing music, got a job at a health food store, or actually first at a cafe, and then, various odd jobs, and played music. And
what was the high point of your musical? Did you say you opened for Country Joe and the Fish, I believe?
I opened for either Country Joe or the Fish, and I cannot tell you which one it was. But that was a big hippie. That was hooked up by some hippie person anyway. But no, we played some fun clubs around the Mabuhay Gardens, which was sort of a famous punk club in the city. But there weren't a lot of high points in the music.
Well, the Afro Klezmer band that you were in.
Yes, yeah.
What was that called? It was a
Chewbacca.
Chewbacca, yeah.
Perhaps the double billing of Chewbacca and Yid Vicious was. That certainly was a performance poster high note, but no, there were some good things. There was good times, but not. It was fun. I was clearly not talented as a musician, super untalented musician, and so I was bored, and I noticed. This is how little attention I'd paid in high school, that one night driving home from a gig, I noticed that the stars were in a different place in the sky than there had been when I went. And it was because it was maybe fall or it was cold time and good clear sky, and it was the constellation of Orion, although I didn't know it was the constellation of Orion, but it's a big boxy thing with the fuzzy thing in the middle. And I remembered somebody telling me about that, and I didn't know why I'd moved. So I was curious enough and bored enough with music.
You were not clear on why it moved in relation to something like the Big Dipper, which was stable, or were you simply amazed at the Earth's rotation?
Well, no, it's better than that. I was not connecting the dots with the Earth's rotation.
Oh, okay.
So the fact that the stars seemed to move in the sky, well, I decided to go and take an astronomy course to teach me why the stars moved. And I showed up at the local community college, and they informed me that there was a prerequisite for that class, which was physics. But it was physics without math, and so maybe that'd be okay. So I took that, and doodle-doodle-doodle, now I'm here.
But I mean,
kind of amazing. One physics course at a junior college.
can you tell everybody where that physics? I mean, I think a lot of people would like to take that physics.
Yeah, that's a good physics course. A lot of bang for the buck on that one.
But I mean, was there some click in your mind that suddenly got math or got conceptually what was going on?
No, super not. In fact, in that physics course, the teacher said F is equal to ma, Newton's second law. Force is equal to mass times acceleration. He says, we can solve for the acceleration by looking at the force and dividing by the mass. A is equal to F divided by m. And I was like, oh, wizard of the magical incantations, teach me how you manipulate the symbols. I was so far away from any kind of mathematics understanding that dividing by m was beyond my conception. So I started at the community college with elementary algebra, and then algebra and trigonometry and advanced algebra and all that kind of stuff. And at first, it was just unbelievably hard. I mean, unbelievably hard. I just decided to do it. Even though I was clear, it didn't feel good, it didn't come easy. I decided that I felt that I had been in a place I didn't want to be. And it felt that I was saving myself. I was changing myself by applying myself as hard as I could, even though I wasn't any good at it, apparently, or guaranteed of any success.
Did you have a goal? Did you think, I want to be a rocket scientist?
I had a friend who had paid attention in high school, and we rode bicycles together, and he wanted to be an engineer. Oh, an engineer, it's got the physics stuff, but someone might actually pay you to do something with that. So that became like an idea in my mind. I didn't really know what it meant. But I can remember I bought in 1986 probably an HP Hewlett-Packard 15C calculator. Now, there's nobody in this room going to know if you know what that is. It's an old-style calculator. It was an engineering calculator, and it was $80. And I was working in a health food store, riding my bicycle to community college, and I had this long talk with myself. Are you in on this? Are you going to keep going with this enough to rate an $80 investment on this calculator? I said yes.
So what do you think it is about your mind that ends up making you good at this? What lent itself? What did you discover as you got further in this process about your mind and how it could do these things?
Yeah. So again, I don't think I have an answer to that. As a kid, I used to, everybody daydreams, in various flavors, right? There's the ones just before you wake up or just as you go to sleep that you can sort of direct a little bit. And then there's the boredom ones. What do you wonder about when you're bored? And I did have a kind of a weird wonder. I used to turn, it's sort of macabre actually, I used to turn gravity off and then on in a different direction and wonder what my body would slam into. So for instance, what if gravity was coming from that corner of the bar? Would I run into that column? And if I did, would that flange on the column get my cheek and break my cheekbone? Would I be able to move out of the way? Could I get my feet around long enough to land on the corner? I mean, weird stuff. But maybe I was doing some sort of spatial reasoning with that. I don't know.
Well, and it kind of fit with what was happening to you at the time, right? Didn't you? You told me once. What's the number of bones you've broken? And
oh, that's right. Yeah, I did break a lot of bones. I have always had a attraction to wondering how much your mind can transcend, or how much will can do. What can your will do? And so, early as a kid, the only thing I could do is will myself not to be afraid, scared, which is actually not such a good idea because your fear is a message from eons of evolution saying this is not a good idea. So I would do things, climb on stuff, go fast on skateboard, sort of adrenaline sports that resulted in me breaking 15 bones in my body. 34 bones in my body in the first 15 years of my life, and many stitches and cutting things off, and that was all just skateboarding and tree climbing and that kind of stuff.
Well, let's fast forward from that to the landing. I mean, so you get. I mean, actually, let's stop a little bit along the way and talk about when you get to JPL. What was the atmosphere like at JPL when you arrived? Was it in its heyday? Was it?
Well, when I got back from grad school, it was not in its heyday. It was sort of a nadir. We'd lost, I mentioned, the Mars Polar Lander. There was another twin with that, the Mars Climate Orbiter. We lost both of those. They were twin mission launched off the same spacecraft, same rocket. We launched both within months of one another, within weeks of one another. And the Mars exploration was kind of in a tailspin. And so I'd been working on a comet mission that had been canceled. My now ex-wife, then wife, had associated with that comet mission. She'd come and moved out here to Manhattan. She was working on Wall Street. I was going to be bi-coastal and work this comet mission. The comet mission goes away. They staffed up the Mars mission, the Hail Mary, which is going to be refly the system that got the little tiny rover to the surface, but put a big rover in the little tiny rover's bag. It never really works out really good when you put too much stuff in a not big enough bag. So they got into trouble in that. And through the Comet mission work, I'd shown up on somebody's radar, and they asked me to come and help with Spirit and Opportunity. And
what was the morale like, or the atmosphere like, when you arrived?
Well, it was down. It was. We've definitely thought that Spirit and Opportunity were a Hail Mary pass. If this is not going to work, who knows what's going to happen? The lab will probably survive, but we may see massive layoffs. I mean, it was sort of apocalyptic.
And so Spirit and Opportunity land with the airbags. That goes well.
They both, 2 in a row, 21 days apart from one another. We felt pretty good about ourselves.
And now you're given then they developed a sky crane.
Yeah.
And so tell me a little bit about, so you've got the higher-ups to sign off on this sky crane idea, this cockamamie device. Mm-hmm. And theoretically, at least, it gives you the opportunity to land much more precisely. Mm-hmm. And in much more interesting spots, because they've kind of discovered that from the Mars Odyssey and other devices, other satellites. So what was the whole debate about where to go on Mars? There must have been lots of wonderful choices.
In fact, it was previously when we'd gone to Mars with Spirit and Opportunity or with Sojourner, landing sites had been selected by engineering safety. It's very hard to get to the surface, go to a place that's easy, and do whatever science you can at that place. And now the scientists were given, we can really go wherever you'd like. And that was a challenge. It took them a couple of years to wade through all of the possible sites and winnow it down and choose Gale Crater.
But this was not your first choice, right? You had another
No,
option.
I still retain some attraction to the adrenaline sports. And I liked the most dangerous of the landing sites. It's called Eberswalde Crater. It was a delta, very beautiful, and the place where we'd land had all these spires, which look very scary to the human eye, but if you run the numbers, they actually don't occupy much space. But it looked dangerous. It was the most dangerous, and I wanted a chance for the landing system to show strut its stuff.
So it wasn't so much about what would have been there to discover scientifically as simply running this obstacle course that was exciting.
When it comes down to it, I'm a little lowbrow in that regard,
But Gale Crater wasn't without its challenges, right? I mean,
No, it has challenge. It had a challenge of the ellipse size. Right? You get into these regions where if your uncertainty footprint grows, all of a sudden you're landing on the side of a mountain, which means you run out of time to get everything done. Right. And you crash before you're ready to land. So it had those challenges. But as far as surface terrain and surface threats, it was relatively benign.
So I think we have a slide that shows the predicted versus the actual landing.
Oh, wow, look at you. Yes, we do.
Can you explain this to us?
Sure. So once again, we're trying to be accurate and tight and land close to where we think we're going to. So in this image, the turquoise blue ellipse is our uncertainty footprint. Actually, that dark band running through it are the black sand dunes that I was out in the desert burning my feet to make sure that we could land on. In there is a black X, kind of near the center of that blue ellipse, that is the spacecraft's estimate of where it is. There's the green, which is on landing night, our best estimate of where the spacecraft is, and then the red, almost right on top of each other, which is the actual place the spacecraft landed. The difference between the center and where the spacecraft landed is about 2 kilometers, or about a mile, and most of that we knew ahead of time that the spacecraft was going to be off by that much. The spacecraft drives itself to the surface using guided entry. So it can only do as good of a job as we tell it where it is, right? It's like if you're going to drive home with your eyes closed, probably a bad idea, but even if you were going to do it and you're going to do a good job of it, you'd need to know where you were starting from. And so if you're off where you're starting from, you're going to be off when you get home. So we knew the spacecraft, the knowledge that the spacecraft had on board was off, but we chose not to update it because every time you send a command to the spacecraft, there's a chance you could mess something up. We don't want to do that, so hands off. So a lot of that missed distance we knew about anyway, but where we thought it would go, it went right on the money.
And that's, I mean, let's put that in perspective. That's after traveling 355 million miles?
That's correct.
Is that right? I did a back-of-envelope calculation. It was like throwing a dart at a dartboard 4 miles away.
Yeah, it's about that.
It's in a fairly
It's
astonishing...
a basketball, three-pointing a basketball in L.A. from New York. It's very, very precise. And so we're pretty proud of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I think we have some images of...
Oh, yeah, I love this one. This is, we call this the crime scene. It's images of the debris that we left on the surface of Mars, which is really cool if you're a landing guy because all the debris is your hardware. I'm going to actually stand up here. This is the Curiosity rover up at the top there. That little looks like a bead. This is an image from orbit at Mars. And the darkness around her is the cleaning of the Martian surface that our rocket plumes have done. So Mars is covered in this red iron oxide-rich dust. And when we landed, we dusted off a chunk of Mars, leaving the darker material that's underneath. This here, you remember from the video, once we are done, we throw away the descent stage. And that's where it went splat. And then threw off some bits as it exploded. Down in the center left, right, that side of the image is our parachute and back shell. And then on the far side over here is the heat shield. So that's all the bits and pieces, the naughty bits of EDO left as... I was talking to a grade school, and some kid from a very well-funded grade school, very well-funded, uppity kid said to me, "Isn't that littering?" And I thought about it for a second, and I came back quickly with my retort. It's an art installation. And actually, that's been sitting with me for a little bit. And actually, I like that. I think that we're doing sort of art here. We're expressing some very fundamental human impulses and attributes when we explore. And so this is the installation that I participated in.
So is it hard to let go? I mean, now your part is ended, right?
Yeah.
As soon as this happens, it lands, you're done.
I'm off the job.
And the rover drivers take over.
Yep.
Right. And that in itself is a fascinating thing. I mean, talking to the rover drivers at JPL, they have this whole wonderful process where the rover sends back every night, it puts itself to sleep and lets its nuclear engine kind of recharge its batteries. And it sends all its coordinates and panoramic videos back to Earth. Those get downloaded into a video game that one of the drivers designed. And she puts on these 3D goggles, they have 16 rover drivers who work in shifts. And they essentially can plan all the moves for the rover for the next day. And it's unbelievably careful. I mean, just to move an arm to touch a rock will take them a day because they want to make sure not to do anything that could disturb the rover, or that whole process seems unbelievable. I mean, in some ways it seems much more careful than what you guys did.
Yeah, it is. Well, it ends up being that one of the key ways spacecraft die is by our own hands. Putting up errors in a bad command that does a bad thing is a distinct, one of the most popular ways to kill a spacecraft. Usually they don't die of old age. They die because we did something to them.
Like Spirit, it ran into a
You
sand
could
dune or
argue
something?
that we drove it into a sand trap. I mean, we drove it into a place that if we had been bright enough not to drive it, it might still be alive today. So that was an example of, so you always you have a priceless, before it lands successfully, it's unclear whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. Was this brilliant or totally stupid? I started developing this little saying that I would use really as an attempt to maintain some shred of credibility as I was trying to hawk this system. And I would say, great works and great folly may be indistinguishable at the outset. And I said that because, so if anything really crazy comes along here, anything really that might change the landscape, it should look crazy. Because if it looks regular, it's probably not changing the landscape. The problem is, crazy also looks crazy. And you may not know it in the beginning. So yeah.
Let's do it very quickly, just show where the rover's been, and then we'll start taking questions. This is an image of kind of a self-portrait.
Self-portrait. This is her travels. So she landed, and that's a dark spot, Bradbury Landing. Ray Bradbury passed just a few days after we landed, and we named our landing site after it. Dark again because we dusted away the iron oxide. And she is moved not in the direction of her intended target, which is a good sign. If you make a plan for exploration and the plan is unchanged by your exploration, you're not exploring much. Anyway, so she's there. She's already told us stuff about Mars that we didn't know before. So we knew that there had been water on the surface of Mars, but we didn't know how long. This image, if you're a Martian geologist, tells you that water has flowed over the surface at this site for thousands of years. That image on the red image is from Mars, and the whiter image is a dry stream bed in the Atacama Desert on Earth. And finally, we've been doing some science, including drilling holes into the surface of Mars and taking up material from down virgin rocky material outside of what's called the weathering rind and processing that. And these measurements have taught us that, in fact, the ancient environment of Mars was habitable for life.
Which
We
is the
haven't-
first, right? The first
It's
habitable
absolutely-
place outside of the Earth. that
That's
we've
correct.
discovered.
And so somebody asked me earlier, what's Curiosity telling us about Mars? And mostly what she's telling us to do is not to stop. Because we keep asking, is Mars dead? You know, give us the evidence that there's nothing there for us. And we aren't getting a resounding, yeah, here's a microbe, there's what's there for you. But each of the answers is saying, yes, there could be. Ask another question. So she's telling us to keep going. The answer is yes. So we have enough spare parts from this mission to fit in a very tight budget and go in 2020 to the surface of Mars with a rover that looks very much like Curiosity, with a landing system that is identical to Curiosity's landing system. And so yes is a yes to that. The second
Would it be
question
for
was,
Europa? Would it be useful?
could you use it for Europa? Could you use the sky crane for Europa or other places? And the answer is you could. We do know that it's scalable. Whether it's the right choice for Europa, we haven't worked through. No one's paid us money to try and figure that one out yet. I really hope somebody does, not for the sky crane's benefit, but for Europa's benefit.
Let's briefly explain why Europa is interesting.
Yeah, so I'm all on about wanting to land on the surface of Europa. Europa is an icy moon of Jupiter's. It's got an ice crust, and we believe it's got a liquid ocean underneath that ice crust. And exobiologists, I'm not an exobiologist, but I hang out with them. Tom and I have a friend that I'm referring to, and exobiologists think that it's the place in the solar system most likely to have existent life today. So I really want to go land on the surface of Europa. Trying to figure stuff like that out. I've been odd jobs. I'm in an odd jobs mode right now. I'm not going to do the 2020. Well, I spent 8 years of my life working EDL for MSL, and I also spent those times training a whole bunch of really very capable folks who've been working with me, a fantastic team. And one of those guys has got the job at the helm, and I'm looking for the next big thing. And in the next big story. So we'll see what that is. I don't know what that is yet. I actually think that the process of getting to Mars is actually the most useful thing that we do, both from an engineering perspective, the industry, the intelligence, the creativity that we need to bring to bear on it, but also from a human exploration perspective, engaging us in wondering about our world and how much our reach is. That's what we find on Mars, is the icing on that cake. And we have already discovered that Mars was habitable. That in itself is good enough for, I think the process of getting there is good enough for the investment, but the answer that we got is also well worth the investment.
Thank you so much, Adam, for coming to this tonight.
You're welcome. Thank you.